You really didn't know he did that?
No, I did. We just haven't gotten there
Oh, okay, yeah.
yet. So let's get
Like
to it.
in History of the World Part 1, the Mel Brooks movie, he comes down with the 3 tablets. Your 15 commandments, and he drops one.
10 Commandments. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Eating the Apple, the podcast where two non-believers take an honest look at the Bible. I'm Jeff.
I'm Chris.
At the end of last episode, we had Moses going to the top of Mount Sinai, receiving explicit instructions from God to go back down, retrieve Aaron, and get ready to deliver some law to the assembled Israelites. Moses reminded God that they can't come too close per his own instructions. So we're going to get right on with the delivery of the 10 Commandments. So starting with the very first verse in Exodus 20, it says, God spoke all these words. And not to get off track immediately, but the specificity of the word words there is meant to kind of evoke the the fact that while these are commandments, these are sentences, these are imperatives that God is issuing, we are essentially what the Hebrew has called them throughout the years, and what the Septuagint called them as well, is words, sayings, or matters. So that's kind of where we get the Greek Decalogue, right? The 10 words.
Right.
So
Why are these 10 set aside, though? I mean, we talked about it just a minute ago, vaguely, but what did you come up with on that? Anything?
The 10 Commandments are, so why are they set aside from what? So from a Christian perspective, these are the 10 Commandments. And until you get into Matthew 22, where Jesus says there are 2 commandments, God and everyone else, right? Matthew 22:36, I forget what it's, the parable of something, but he's talking to a lawyer, right? And the lawyer's like, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, well, God. So the first tablet, and then everyone else, the second tablet. So why are they set aside from the other 603 Mishvot, the other laws that we're about to encounter throughout the rest of Exodus and Leviticus? I've read different things. Some people say it's to help, because we have 10 fingers, it's to help us count all the different, keep track of all the commandments, and they're meant to be all encompassing. The fact that they're delivered 5 and 5, 5 on one tablet, 5 on the others, to help you realize that the ones on the right hand are for God and the other ones are for humans.
But isn't that the case, though? Like in the text, it doesn't say that these 10 are the ones inscribed on the tablet. It just says the laws of the covenant or something like that. So it could have been everything, or it could have been everything that's listed in this section, which is not all 600, but it's more than 10. So
613 total. So I want to say in Exodus 28, I forget where, in Exodus 28 we get that the laws on the tablet were written by God's right hand, the finger on God's right hand.
Right, but it doesn't specify the 10 commandments. It just says the law of the covenant, or something along those lines.
Gotcha.
So it could have been, I don't know how many laws there are in this section, before it takes a break, but it certainly could have been more.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it immediately. I thought it was in 28. It certainly could. I'm really not sure. So what are those 10 words? What are those 10 sayings of the Decalogue? Typically, most traditions will combine verses 2 and 3. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, and you shall have no other gods before me. Right?
Yeah.
What does it mean when God says, put no other gods before me? Is he admitting that there are other legitimate gods, or is he saying to you, things that you deem gods?
I don't know. Obviously, I'm just a scholar. You could say dumbass, and I wouldn't be offended. But it seems to me that while, yes, it's possible that could be the case, at the very minimum, you can say that God's saying that these other gods exist as things that people worship, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're real or actually powerful. It just means that for sure the Israelites know of other gods and could potentially worship them.
Right. Especially given that they were just extricated from a land that was, seated for centuries, if not longer, in a polytheistic culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the land of Egypt. So it is interesting to note that verse 2 says, "I am the Lord your God," capital G, meaning that it's meant to say Yahweh there. And then in verse 3, God's is lowercase. So it's essentially saying, these are unimportant, these little transient gods that, you might be worshiping as an idol of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of idols, verse 4, you shall not make yourself you shall not make yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, in the water, or the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations for those who love me and keep my commandments.
Yeah. So let's go back just a second to the no graven images thing. The that cultural study Bible that I've been going through has a note that says that it doesn't restrict art, just images of God. But the thing is, it specifically says in the text, you're not going to have any likeness of anything in heaven above, or that is on the earth, or that is beneath the earth, or that is in the water under the earth. Mm-hmm. So, and that's separate from you shall not bow down and worship them and serve them or whatever. So it's separating the images from the worship. So it sounds to me like that includes art. You're not supposed to have.
Yeah, I can see how that's how that can be interpreted that way.
That's just the way it reads to me initially.
Well, you talk about God being a jealous God. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, getting that second part, that same study Bible has a note for that as well. It says that the third and fourth generation refers to a household, not children yet to be born. But if that's the case, then how do you interpret the 1,000 generations? You have to use the same lens, and that doesn't mesh up.
Yeah, I also had that one kind of caught me too. So it's easy. So if you remove verse 5 alone, verse 5 stands alone in saying, if you do that, like, I'm a jealous God. So if you bow down and worship to these carven images, then I will punish your household to the third and fourth generation. Full stop. That's the verse. So, I mean, if you were going to pull any one bit of inspiration out of this text, you could pull that and be like, what the hell, But then it continues with verse 6. But I show love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. Whenever I asked some Christians about that particular verse, they said that, do you see how that we're using, you can't count, the number 1,000 is to enumerate that it's innumerable. It's to say that I'll love you forever. And I'm like, well, that's not what verse 5 said. Verse 5 was very explicit. Third and fourth generation. And God
and
has
it's
already
all
shown,
one statement. It's separated into two verses, but it's exactly.
Right. Yeah, and like God's already shown a proclivity in Genesis, throughout the beginning of the Torah, to be willing to punish generations, like your entire lineage is going to be a boneheaded donkey or whatever, like a thick boned donkey. That's what God does, and so for it to sit here and be like, or for the verse to say, I'm going to punish your children to the third and fourth generation, but I'm going to love you for 1,000 if you do worship me or whatever. You're like, well, you can't have both. It has to be both. You have to have it. You have to use the same lens, like you were saying, for both.
Yeah.
So it's hyperbole, and 1,000 means innumerable, and therefore 3 and 4 means what? Until the rest of the day, like until tomorrow. Like, what does that mean?
It definitely specifies that it's going to, you punish the children of the parents for the parents' iniquity. So it's definitely unjust. Like, talk about God being just and everything else. This definitely seems unjust. And I know people would say, oh, but you can't. You're just human. You can't understand the workings of God or whatever. But why say it then? Like
Yeah, and
you'd think this all-encompassing God could be a little more specific.
yeah, and to put it into a cultural into a context of this time and place, I wonder if you were to intone to someone that you are going to curse them for 3 or 4 generations, like 3 or 4 generations is all you're going to see. Like if you grow up to be a ripe old age, the 4th generation, if you're lucky, is all you're going to see, and so they too will be cursed because of your iniquity.
Right.
And I wonder if that's meant to imply that all you'll ever know, as far as your family's concerned, is a curse. So it could be interpreted that way, I think. Whereas for 1,000, you can say, okay, I can rest my head knowing that my lineage is taken care of henceforth.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's bordering on that same lens, I guess. I could kind of see that, but again, like it wasn't just the one version. Everything that I've seen has essentially been very specific.
Yeah. And also, we were talking about God being a jealous God. It talks in here about you were talking about art versus like a literal idol, and I can see art being included in the things that you're not supposed to own, because if I'm a jealous husband and
Exactly.
my wife, my wife had pictures of old boyfriends everywhere, I'd be like,
Or
hey,
if she was being
what the hell is that?
flirtatious with, her personal trainer or something.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I get it. The Lord,
Yeah.
I was created in His image. Clearly, I was carved in His image. All right. Verse 7, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses His name. So, is that, I'm assuming, like you have a note here about, is that why we can't say YHWH? I'm assuming that's right. It's a way to.
Yeah, definitely. But I think the more troublesome thing to unpack is, I mean, that was curiosity in the moment when I made the note, but God not acquitting or hold people guiltless to take His name in vain. I don't know. So we talk about like sin and forgiveness of sin and stuff like that. Is this one of the things that He can't forgive because He's got, like just because He's stubborn? I'm not entirely sure how to take it other than that way,
Yeah. So, I'm really not sure what the point of that's going to be, except to say that. So, I was listening to a rabbi last night talk about this particular commandment, and he talked about what it was that what all is involved with using the Lord's name in vain. And kind of doing the math there and figuring out that we can't say YHWH. It's to make sure that we don't accidentally fall into the habit of invoking God whenever we can handle things ourselves.
Yeah. No, I can totally understand the motivation for that. Definitely.
But as far as like what God's gonna do, is that what, like, why does that rise to the level of, maybe God doesn't want to be bothered every time I'm like, oh, please let the Eagles win this Sunday, and God's like, just stop it. I don't care about the Eagles. I'm a Cowboys fan,
Well,
So,
I mean, yeah, but you think about it, everything that we've had up until this point, people go to God. God can speak to them, I guess, randomly, prophets or whatever, but people go to a place to seek God. So maybe He doesn't listen unless you're seeking Him out. You know what I mean?
that is an interesting point. Let me see what Rashi says about that. Let's see. A little bit of silence here. Rashi doesn't say much. He's just talking about people who swear for no reason and in vain. This is God just So why? Why is this a thing? That's a great question. Why is God so concerned? Like, okay, so this is the penultimate commandment as it refers to, or as it relates to God Himself, right? So let's get on to the next one, and then we'll kind of review the previous 4 or 5, depending on how you look at it, as a set. So it says, verse 8: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. on it.
Yeah,
You shall
Dad,
not
you
do any
told
work.
us.
Yeah, neither. Yeah, exactly. We've heard this. Neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens of the earth, the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that's in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So thinking of a God that wants you to not pray, not worship any other gods, not make any images in a likeness of another god or his image, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's okay.
Or the
Not
mounted
misuse
fish
his
on the
name,
wall. Yeah.
right? Not misuse his name, and also keep the Sabbath day, keep his day of rest holy.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if verse 7 with the using his name in vain kind of it kind of is encapsulated by the other three. Like if it makes more sense in that context, but even positing that as a point, I'm not seeing it. I really don't know where we get misusing the name of the Lord, taking his name in vain.
Yeah, I mean,
You have any thoughts on that?
well, the only thing I can think of is, uh, I could be wrong. Like I said, I'm not a scholar. I'm going to get a lot of this wrong, and I really hope people correct me. I want to know where I'm wrong so I can have it, corrected or whatever. But my understanding is this is a story that kind of survived through time a little bit. There was many other competing uh, stories, going around, and then after the Jewish exile to Babylon is when all of this starts getting kind of codified and written down. And so, keeping that in mind, I could kind of see it just being a respect thing. Don't take the name of God in vain. Don't use it frivolously. Don't invoke it in evil ways. That kind of thing. That's where I think it comes from. Thinking about it as this happened, God telling you this, I don't see a point necessarily, unless he just doesn't want to hear it.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I had the same thought. I had a similar thought where if we're looking at this in the terms of a covenant, so if you and I were going to enter into an agreement, part of those bylaws, part of the strictures of that agreement might be to like, okay, so we're going to enter into this thing of mutual respect. It's important to me that you not sully my name. And it could be that. It could be like, don't you use the word frivolous. That's perfect. Like you don't evoke me whenever it's some silly little trite matter when
Mm-hmm.
I'm more involved in making sure that slaves get their just desserts or whatever, things like that. So yeah, that could very well be it. So you mentioned the word covenant. I'm wondering if now's a good. So I guess what I'll do is I'll go ahead and admit that I wanted to outline this bit as the covenant between God and man, right?
Mm-hmm.
And its corollary with a covenant between a married couple, right? And I'll get to
Right.
those parts later. I'll get to the married couple parts later. But notice how in verse 2 it says, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery." I looked in my research. I found that it follows an ancient treaty pattern where you first mention your name, I'm Jeff, and then you say what your title is, and then what you did to earn that title. That's essentially what God's doing. He's setting forth a boilerplate treaty at this point,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's saying, I'm God, the one that your ancestors worshipped, and I brought you out of slavery, that type of thing. And then going on with, here's all of the things that I expect out of this deal. You're going to get Canaan, not without bloodshed, but you're going to get Canaan. And here's what I
Mm-hmm.
want. I want these 10 things plus these other 603 things.
So there's a note. I believe I could be wrong. I've been reading so much all this stuff. Some of it runs together, but there's a note in this cultural praxis or what is it? Cultural background study Bible, and I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure it's at the part where it's talking about putting the tablets of the covenant in the ark. But it talks about how that was kind of a common practice. You would take these treaties that you had with other people and you would put them in the box at the foot of the gods. That way the
Awesome.
gods were holding the covenant and keeping it, you know, like, I guess, giving it
Keeping holy watch
legitimacy.
over
Or
it.
exactly. So
Okay.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I
I
dig
did
it.
want to make a note about keeping the Sabbath. I was thinking about it, and I was like, why don't Christians keep this if it's so important that it's the 10, and they're putting the 10 commandments back in schools now and everything? Why don't Christians keep the Sabbath? And then I thought, well, I could kind of see Jesus being resurrected on Easter Sunday. Then, that's why Sunday is a special day in Christendom or whatever. And so maybe it, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Supersedes this
Hmm.
in their eyes, and that kind of makes sense. But then, if you're going to do that, then why still hold all the rest of the 10 Commandments? Why include that in your list of the 10 Commandments? As a Christian, if you're not going to follow it, you know what I mean? Even
Hmm.
if you've got a good reason.
Hmm. Well, yeah, that's a great point, and I don't know. I don't know the explicit answer, but
Yeah.
something that I've considered is it. Whenever I talk to Christian believers, they don't seem to know much about Leviticus, and so
Yeah.
what I've come to kind of understand is that Jesus, part of Jesus's salvation, part of our salvation through Jesus, is that we don't have to read the boring parts of the Bible anymore. So
Yeah.
what happened is that, now this is me spitballing. What happened was the Sabbath became a day not of don't drive an engine because you're starting a fire by doing that and all those things. It became remembering the Sabbath is remembering the sacrifice, remembering those things. So like you said, you mentioned Easter Sunday, Jesus being risen, right? So it's go to church, be in this holy sanctum amongst other believers, receiving the word of God, and then go on about your day, like remembering that there was a sacrifice given, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became the replacement for the you know don't
Right.
don't drive your car and don't turn on a light switch type of thing.
Right. I mean,
Um,
I get that, but again, you're just gonna supersede one without making a note of it, without removing it from your list. You've changed so much already of the Bible. Why not change that?
yeah,
It
no, I
just
don't
comes
know.
down to people picking and choosing what they want because it aligns with what they believe.
Yeah,
You're justifying your own beliefs through the Bible and not taking your beliefs from the Bible.
yeah, no, yeah. And so man, when am I gonna get a believer on here so we can ask them, like, what does this mean to you? I've been talking to people, and I reached out to someone. I listened to a conservative Christian sermon podcast, and I'm in an open dialogue with their main pastor, but he's not interested in coming on.
Mm-hmm.
He always gives me names to other people. So I got the name of their associate pastor, the one that fills in, and he
Mm-hmm.
hasn't messaged me back, but he seems very willing, because whenever you go to his social media pages, his social media is just full of him like looking directly in the camera, being like, "Hi, what are just
Yeah.
talking, like kind of being
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
Sunday school teacher kind of guy." It's kind of
Right.
neat, and I want to get him on here.
Yeah.
Um,
That'd be awesome.
so that's 12:8. So we've gone over. So these are, according to some traditions, these are the commandments listed on one of the two tablets. These are the
Mm-hmm.
commandments, as one Christian put it to me on Reddit. These are the vertical tablets. These are this is the vertical commandments that are listed on one tablet that extend from humanity to the Almighty. And
Mm-hmm.
so that is where we draw the distinction between these and the other ones that are as follows: honor your father and mother. This is verse 12. Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. We're talking about Canaan there.
Yeah.
Again, this is
So
part of that.
yeah. Yeah. Oh no. Go ahead.
No,
I
this is part of the promise. He's reminding you, like, this is the covenant that we're creating right now.
Yeah. So uh, honoring your father and mother, I get it. I really do. Like, some people take it too far, and say you have to honor them no matter how they treat you or whatever. But I get the imperative. I get the reasoning behind it. Except that the reasoning behind it is not what the reasoning you would think is. The reason is so that you can live a long time in the land, in the promised land or whatever. So is that still why you're supposed to honor your father and mother?
So that you
They
can
don't
get all of their spoils of their inheritance or whatever?
Yeah, well, so the entire Holy Land is not given to the descendants of Abraham at this moment, and we'll get to that in a little bit because it explains exactly where the Holy Land is. It's a very, very bad description of the location, but it explains it, and all of it is not being occupied by the Jews or Israelites, however you want to say it. So I mean, I don't.
Well,
I mean,
you're not far. So I'm looking forward to getting to the part where you talk about what specifically this means, because you have something in mind that I haven't considered yet. But
mm-hmm.
when it comes to honoring your father and mother, you're right. This conservative podcast I was listening to, much kind of like what I was talking about, where they kind of skip the Levitical parts, the parts where the priests actually write the rules. They talk about honoring your father and mother in spite or despite the fact that they might not have your best intentions at heart, because God said to. God always has your best intentions at heart, or always has his best intentions and your best outcomes at heart. So regardless of what happens to you, you're still to honor them. That is in stark contrast to a lot of the Judaic interpretations that I've read and discussed with people, where they say, no, there are other laws written down in Leviticus that say your health supersedes these other commandments. The commandments are equal as far as they're concerned. These are just part of the 613 Mishvot. So you're told to honor your father and mother, but not if it's going to cause you harm. If staying in a household that's going to, that elicits abuse and all these other types of things, and only serve to make you worse off, get the hell out of there. Do what you have to do. And
well, it's
and
like
that
keeping the Sabbath. I don't think applies if your house is on fire. You could put it out. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I didn't start the fire, God. I just put it out. Maybe that's what the Billy Joel song. Maybe he was just making sure God knew that he was keeping the Sabbath holy. We didn't start the fire. Okay. And so anyway, so yeah, but like I said, the Christian podcast I was listening to, the Christian sermon I was listening to, they were like, no, you have to, and I was like, surely that's not what you mean. And the pastor went on to further delineate what he was talking about. Like, if they're abusive, if they're, if they verbally attack you, things like that, you have to find a way. You have to remember that God has you in mind when he's doing this. It's like you're putting, or when your parents are doing this, God's giving you these trials so that you'll become a better person or whatever. I was like, oh God, that sounds terrible.
That's so gross. That's really gross.
But I mean, who knows? Yeah. What's funny is I figure longer than that, when we were kids, if we were to read that, we would take that to heart. We would be like, okay, got it. But nowadays, in the modern context and the kind of the way that you and I have the prescription you and I use to raise our kids, that just seems so egregious and just completely outside of the norm that, I couldn't even fathom getting anywhere close to believing that, you should honor your father and mother if they're pieces of crap,
Right.
Okay. So that's verse 12. Verse 13, don't murder. Verse 14, don't commit adultery.
Now, hang on. We got to talk about the murder thing because
let me kill him.
Well, is it you shall not kill, you shall not murder, because there can be a case made for both. And I personally think that it should be kill. And again, I don't know the background. I don't know the origin, any of this, but if I was God, I'd be saying, don't kill, because I think personally, even if you're justified in killing, I'm not a pacifist, but I'm not going to do harm to anybody if I can avoid it, and I would kill to protect my family. I'll say that out front. I would still think that that's a bad act and that I would be morally responsible if that happened, So I think saying murder, even though it might be, the intent might be the actionable intent. I think that because of that wording, it's a lot easier to justify stuff rather than if it's don't kill.
Excellent point. So they there is an account that I read that said that these all throughout the millennia, the words of the Decalogue have been kept somewhat vague in order to allow for different societal interpretations. They knew that different people live different types of lives in different societies.
Mm-hmm.
And what these are meant to do is give you a vague overview of what God is allows and doesn't allow, right? And to allow you to interpret them kind of in keeping with your own, societal views. That's what makes the argument that the Ten Commandments are eternal and universal so insidious, because they're just vague. It's like saying this mentalist is capable of producing your phone number without ever having spoken to you, using a series of vague questions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of, but it's a trick. It's kind of a trick. Here's a bunch of vague things that everyone recognizes for the most part we shouldn't do. Don't kill. Yeah, like to say that that's not number one. Somehow that's not number one above honor your father and mother. It's like, what are we doing? Honor your
Right.
father and mother. But and less important, don't kill. Um, uh, and so it's kind of this like this, not bait and switch, but it's kind of like this is just this vague magic trick where you're saying like, see how universal these rules are. Like, well, yeah, I do, but they're also, you're not using specific language. If the more specific you could be, the more impressed I would be that they're so universal.
Mm-hmm.
Don't
Yeah,
don't
exactly.
murder. Well, we're going to get more rules later. In fact, I wrote down just a few that I found between now and verse 20 or chapter 25 where you're allowed to kill. Like they
Oh
expect
yeah.
you to kill. Not
Yeah.
just animals, but humans, and it's not just in cases where, like you just said, where I'm defending my household, my family, myself. It's like, no, if someone looks at you askance, stuff like that. So, all right. So don't commit adultery.
Yeah. That's another
Perfectly
one that
fine.
needs to be more specific though, because adultery did not mean what it means now back then.
What does it mean? What did it mean?
Well, from what I understand, adultery only was like if you were sleeping with a married woman. Like
Uh-huh.
if you were married but she was not, perfectly fine. But if she was
Wow.
married, you are damaging the property of someone else.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But again, it's left vague. And also,
Yeah.
it's interesting how these were rules. Okay, so I had some. We'll get through the 10 because there's a lot more that I've read about this, but nothing about these things specifically. So that's a very good point you just made. Don't
Well,
steal. Don't steal. Verse 15.
yeah, that Cultural Backgrounds Bible, the notes saying that a lot of these are based on laws of other peoples in the areas. You know what I mean? So even taking these things as coming from God, if that's the case, and He's laying them down now, why are they so similar to everywhere else? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. People all throughout the book, all throughout the first 5 books, surely would have had that thought, because again,
Yeah, yeah.
we're not getting this as a set of books and strictures until the the last millennia of the BC, right? Like what is it? The earliest we see some of these things actually committed to parchment is like 900, and these are events that are supposedly taking place in the 1500s BC. So
What does this chart say?
a lot of this would
Yeah, like
sound really familiar.
1400.
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff would sound familiar to these people who have heard it their entire lives through oral tradition.
Yeah.
Now they get this piece of paper that said, no, God said, it's like, oh, that makes sense. And so you can draw from all these different, Babylonian, um, inspirations, things like that. There's also, this is something I was going to get into later, but since you mentioned it, the Book of Jubilees had 6 commandments. The oh man, what's the word for it? I had it written down somewhere. The Noachian laws were 7 laws, and they were all very similar. The laws of Noah, the ones that supposedly God gave to Noah in the Book of Enoch. They're essentially the same. They're don't steal, don't kill, things like that. And so
Mm-hmm.
here we get a more codified, easier to remember version of these things that now have to include a strictures that keep you safe from a jealous, wrathful God.
Yeah. I mean, some of this is not exactly super easy to remember either, but
Yeah. So yeah, as far as it's funny, I wish we had the rabbi on because he
yeah.
during our podcast with him, he was like, I mentioned, I think it was when I was trying to say, do I say Adonai? He's like, you can say whatever you want. I'm not allowed to say it. And
Right.
it's funny because I came across that same note in talking to people on the Judaism subreddit. They're like, the 613 Mishvot are for us. You have to abide by the seven laws that Noah set forth. As far as I'm concerned, you don't have to do anything. But as far as I'm
Mhm.
concerned, those are the Gentilian laws. Those are for you. The rest of them are for me. And it's not until you undergo like a year of study and remember and learning how to read Hebrew that you even have to start caring about the rest of the 606. So don't steal. You have any problems with that, Chris? You think you want to steal so bad?
I mean, it's fun sometimes. No,
Don't
but I mean,
steal.
like, what if you're starving and you're just taking some corn out of somebody's field, or whatever?
Yep.
I again, like killing in self-defense, it's still a bad thing, but justified. So
Mm-hmm.
I
Well,
don't
there are
know.
further laws. There are laws that we go over later that say that you're not supposed to show prejudice or give special um, remuneration or whatever to the poverty stricken. So like judge them just as if they were not poverty stricken. So I mean that kind of remembers
Yeah, but I
this
mean,
commandment.
yeah, I could see that. Like, I was going to say, there's also a law about you have to leave your fields fallow for part of the time, and anything that grows in that time, the poor are supposed to be allowed to just come and take freely. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's you know making a provision for
Mm-hmm.
that, so that they're not
Mm-hmm.
technically stealing. I don't know.
Um, then verses 16 and 17 kind of go together. Don't give false testimony against your neighbor, and don't covet your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, his male or female servants, his donkeys, his ox, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
So I'm
Semantics.
not entirely sure they go together, because I've read is that verse 16, the bearing false witness, is specifically a legal thing. It's not
Mm,
just don't lie. It's
okay.
you know in a if you're taking them before the leaders, Moses or whoever, you're not supposed to lie against them in that sense to gain an unfair advantage, or to condemn them when they're not guilty or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, I
And
can see that being
also,
the case.
what who's your neighbor? This is a famous parable, I think, in the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
Who is your neighbor or whatever, but it's ambiguous.
The parable of the Good Samaritan, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I think in that parable, Jesus says that your neighbor is anyone with whom you come in contact, right?
Right, but
Yeah.
again,
So
that was years later.
yeah, and we need,
Yep.
but we. It's funny
It's a
because
couple
we
years.
had this book. We needed more instruction. So
Yeah.
along comes this apocalyptic rabbi. It's like, hey,
Oh, but no,
rabbi,
but no,
what is this?
but the 10 are so important that we
Yeah,
don't
no.
need clarification.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so we talked earlier about, or I mentioned earlier, how the first tablet is the connection that humanity has with God, a set of vertical commandments that attach you to
Hmm.
the Almighty. The next five are supposedly a horizontal covenant that protects you from everyone else and everyone else from you. It's basically
Hmm.
saying, all right, this is how you take care of me, and this is how you take care of everybody else. So at this point, if you don't mind, I'd like to go over a way. I'd like to go over some explication that that Rabbi David Foreman made in his Parsha Companion about how the the Ten Commandments between the Ten Commandments is basically a covenant between God and humanity, and how that mirrors the covenant between um, a married couple.
Hmm.
Does that matter? Does that bother you at all?
No, go ahead.
Okay, sweet. So
I actually have
let me see.
a thing to say about that after you're done. I think is interesting.
Okay, so I thought I sent it to myself, but apparently I just put it on my iPad here. Okay. So the 10 Commandments as a wedding ketubah. So you have the first 1-2 commandments, depending on your interpretation, are to, well, I'm the Lord, don't have any gods before me, and don't make yourself a graven image or whatever. And it's basically saying, I'm your husband. Now remember, this was a one-way street, right? So if I recall correctly from what I read, you would marriages then were all arranged, and you would have to there's like a ceremony that you would tell your parents, hey, I like the cut of Rachel's jib or whatever, and they would say, I do like the way their family handles their business, and I do like that daughter of theirs. So you give her a glass of wine and you say, I pick you. And this takes place after some sort of festival where all the virgins put on their white cloaks and stomp around in grapes in the local vineyard. And you're supposed to just kind of watch them get their white robes red, you know what I mean? And like it's supposed to be like, oh yeah, I like that virgin right there. And so then you go and find them and give them a glass of wine. If they drink the wine, they're accepting your ketubah. They're accepting the deal that you're making them, right? And again, this first commandment lines up with I'm your husband, don't have any other lovers, and don't have pictures of your former lovers. Not that you would, because you're a virgin, but
Right.
the second one, don't misuse the name of your Lord. It's like, don't sully my name. I'm your husband. I'm providing for you. You don't need to be talking crap to the neighbors about me, right? This is where so some of these are weird. This is literally what they said. Okay. Remember the Sabbath day is one of the commandments. As far as it's concerned with marriage, keep a date night and set it aside for me, your husband. Do not do any work on date night. So I'm sorry to giggle. Okay, sorry.
I could totally see this, being constructed as this kind of marriage analog. It's, easily be seen, but some of those justifications.
So honor your father and mother. Sorry, honor your father and mother. Trust that my provision is enough for you. That's the analog. Don't murder. It's don't hurt yourself. Don't commit adultery. Protect your sexuality. Don't dress in a provocative fashion. Things like that. Don't commit don't steal. Don't take what isn't yours. Don't give false testimony. Tell the truth about yourself. And finally, don't covet. Be satisfied with what we have built together. Be satisfied with what I've provided for you. But that's kind of okay. So that being the case, now we can draw a lineation between how the 5 commandments on one tablet and the 5 commandments on the other, the ones that have to do with God and the ones that have to do with humanity, are kind of corollaries for one another. Okay, so we have to according to Foreman, you first have to see that it's a wedding covenant. God is taking the Israelites as his bride, right? And then realize that commandment number 1 is don't put anyone before me. And then number 6 is don't murder. Don't destroy the covenant that we've created. That's the connection between.
Well, I thought it was don't hurt
6,
yourself.
Right? Well, yeah, that's for the wedding thing. Taking it back, seeing it here as the wedding ketubah, and then taking it back to the 10 Commandments. It's don't put any gods before me, and don't murder. So basically, you're saying 1 and 6 are similar in that I don't want you to destroy the covenant that we've created, and I don't want you to destroy any lives that I've made to surround you with. Committing adultery is the same as having graven images. You're essentially lusting after others. So adultery, graven images. Stealing is misusing their name, and so on and so forth. Let's see, what else? Giving false testimony is keeping the Sabbath day holy. You're essentially saying, I don't know how they drew that correlation, but like, help me out. How can we make that work? And then
you're on your own, brother.
And then finally, coveting your neighbor's house is forgetting the land that's set aside for you, saying, I'd rather live here than the chosen land that God's given me. Things like that. So
yeah, I don't know.
I did the best I could with that. Like that's, I don't know. We've had 3,500 years to look at this stuff and figure out a way to make it contemporary at every time,
Yeah.
So I don't know. Some of those things kind of stuck out to me. Like, okay, good job, you did it. That sounds pretty
Well,
good.
and
I don't hate
yeah,
that.
right, yeah. But also, and this might be well known, and I just thought of it, the other day. Well, it's months ago actually, but still, um,
We've been doing this for a while.
right, right. But I could be completely off base, or it could be, widely known, and I just haven't run across it in my minimal studying. But like, it being a marriage thing in the Jewish tradition, in a marriage, you stomp on the wine glass or whatever, you break it. From what I understand, that's supposed to be like a facsimile of, you know, it's like a potential curse. If I break these vows, this is what's going to happen to me. And when Moses comes down from the mountain with the tablets, and he, finds them worshiping this golden idol of this bull,
He
and he
does?
throws the tablets on the ground and breaks them. You know what I
Oh
mean?
no.
And so it sounds kind of similar, that kind of thing. You know what I mean? That's probably wrong.
I
I
didn't
don't
know
know.
he I
It
didn't know he
just
did that. But that sounds good. That
you
sounds right.
you really didn't know he did that?
No, I did. We just haven't gotten there
Oh, okay, yeah.
yet. So let's get
Like
to it.
in History of the World Part 1, the Mel Brooks movie, he comes down with the 3 tablets. Your 15 commandments, and he drops one. Your 10
Your
commandments.
10 commandments. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So the people saw the thunder and lightning. It was very, very frightening, and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke. They trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us, or we will die." So again, it's this thing again where everyone's afraid that God is going to kill them with his voice. There's no evidence for that. It's never happened. It literally has never ever happened in
Mm-hmm.
any of the books that we've read or that exist in the 66 books that we're studying here. And yet, I guess they're just so scared of thunder and lightning that he's a storm god after all.
Yeah.
Um, Moses said, "Don't be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear that you have now will keep you from sinning." And the people maintained their distance while Moses approached that thick, thick darkness where God was.
Mm-hmm.
And so then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites this. You have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven. Do not make any gods to be alongside me. Do not make yourselves gods of silver or gods of gold." Like, yep. That
Yeah.
was part of the commandments.
Yeah, Dad, you
Now,
told us.
it so okay. It's probably just me, but there's like a chronological displacement between what was it? Exodus 19:25, the end of that last chapter,
Right.
and this here, because it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like kind of like the Judah thing in Genesis 38, where they took this story and put it in here because that's where it fits the best. It's
Mm-hmm.
like here are the 10 commandments, but the storm that is happening here on Exodus 18 is lines up exactly with the cut from 1925.
Right.
So here's a list of commandments, and then here's the story of what happened. But we already know the commandments, so we're going to get a lot of repetition when God's like,
Right.
"Tell them about my covenant." I mean, is that concerning to you, or is it just like they did the best
No,
they could to
that's
insert the?
I mean, it sounds to me like it was, people trying to figure out how to put this when they're writing it all down, codifying it together. But that was one of the reasons I think people could say that the Decalogue is separate, is because this passage here is, right after, and it comes in between some more of the commandments or whatever. But it's kind of just a retelling of what just happened when Moses was called up to the mountain and then sent back down and told, "Hey, you got to stay here and then come back up." And um, so because it's that, it seems to me that this is not separate. It is technically, because
Oh,
we have this in here, but because it's a retelling, you know, it doesn't make
hmm.
sense to me that the 10 are separate because this
Huh.
is here. You know what I mean?
Huh. Okay. Yep, I gotcha. Okay, and I think I agree. When the Israelites say, or when God says to the Israelites, "You've heard me speak to you," so um, you've seen for yourselves that I've spoken to you from heaven.
Mm-hmm.
When? when did that happen? And why, if that's the case, this is happening after the Israelites were too scared to approach God, approach the thick darkness.
Well, it
Why
sounds to
would
me
God
that
remind them?
that's right. That's what I'm saying. I think that this is just a kind of a not necessarily a retelling of the story. It's kind of an error when they were putting it all together. They had maybe a couple of versions of it and they're trying to figure stuff out or whatever. But this is just, we've already had the smoke and the fire and the shofar blowing and all of this. And, so it seems to me that this is what happened before he went up and got the Decalogue,
Okay.
just kind of retold.
Yeah. Agreed.
Now I'm repeating myself.
Well, that's because I'm asking bad questions. I'm sorry about that.
I don't know.
24. Make an altar of earth for me, God said, and sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, your sheep and your goats and your cattle. Wherever I cause my name to be honored, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, for your private parts may be exposed.
Why can't the altar see a softy?
I like there seems to be a continuing theme of quickness, of making things in a haste so that you're not leaving yourselves exposed. God's essentially saying, I'm not going to make it difficult for you to come to me, but I do require you to burn your sheep, goats, and cattle, and for you to build this altar. That is a requirement, but don't use tools. Use these animals that you spent time and wealth to accumulate. But whenever it comes time to build the altar, don't get too fancy with it. Just make a pile of bricks or a pile of stones. And if you're going to climb it, make sure it's a ramp and not stairs, because I don't want to see no private parts.
Well, that sounds to me more like you shouldn't be descending steps to it.
Interesting.
It says go up by steps, but I think it meant more go up to the altar, not necessarily up vertically.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's no point. There's no nakedness that can be exposed unless you're up above it, unless you're just going up to it naked.
There's an altar at Megiddo. Most people have heard about it, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally, 12 inches off the ground. It's a circular altar made of stones, but there's literally 2 steps. It's like, so I'm not supposed to use steps, but even an altar that's that tall, for which you only need to ascend using 2 steps, that's too much, because whom am I going to make embarrassed with my nakedness? The people below me ascending behind me, or God himself, who is personified in this altar?
It says your nakedness maybe not be exposed upon the altar. So
on it. Yeah, see, and that's a different translation, because on NIV it just says so that your private parts may not be exposed.
Oh yeah, I think the Catholic version I've been reading says that as well, but the NRSV, UE, and the ESV, and a couple others that I checked, all specify may not be exposed on it or to it or whatever.
Well, see, on to it would mean the altar itself and all of the things that are personified thereof. Or, it could be because you're elevated, people can look under your cloak and be like, holy Lord, good job, Moses.
Yeah.
Who's to say?
I mean, I guess.
But also, it's weird that it says this here and now, but later in Exodus, we'll get there, there's literally a law that says that Moses has to have created for all the priests and Levitical, priests, so all the people that are going to be ascending the altar, to make underwear for them, underclothes made of linen. That's supposed to. Right. This is literally in the law that extend from the waist to the thigh. Mm-hmm. What's the problem then? There's no nudity to be exposed, and if you're in there without those things.
So I get where you're going with that. I agree. You're making underwear to prevent people, or to prevent your nakedness from being exposed, but I've also heard that specifically talking in the New Testament, when Jesus stripped down to his undergarments and washed people's feet, showing your undergarments is the equivalent of being naked. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. No, you raise a good point. In fact, another thing I read, and I didn't know that it had a basis in the Bible, was that you should be just as embarrassed about showing your undergarments as you are about showing the hint of nudity is the same as nudity itself.
So one thing I did want to know about is why the altar itself needs to be so basic. It's an earthen altar, or it can be stones, but not hewn stones. And yet the ark is, really nice
Just
wood overlaid with
the most
gold.
ornate thing. Yeah.
Yeah, there's all that. I could see you're burning stuff on the altar. Barbecue. Essentially, you're making barbecue for God, and a lot of that is done. You cook lambs in pits in the ground and stuff. I think the Bedouins still do that. Things like that. I could see that being like the origin of the earthen uh, altar or whatever, but it just kind of seems out of place. You imagine you're in the tabernacle, the temple, whatever. There's all these vestments. There's uh, intricately woven drapes with cherubim on them. You've got a gold table with the candelabra and the bowl and all of this, and then the one day the priest can step into the Holy of Holies and he walks in and it's just a pile of dirt with a flat top. You know, uh, it
Yeah.
seems out of place.
I agree. I guess to me it seems that the altars are meant to be temporary, whereas the ark is meant to be eternal. The ark is meant to hold this covenant forevermore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So regardless of where it is, like regardless of, so you build the altar to have a conference, to have counsel with God, and what
Mm-hmm.
God is saying is, it's easy to get to me. All I want you to do is build an altar of stones. They don't have to be nice. But this covenant that I'm keeping with you, I want you to keep in this ornate box that's literally made of
Okay,
gold. How in the hell are you supposed to find gold?
that's that's a good way to look at it, and I think it makes even more sense having the altar itself be made of earth and stuff. Because if this is the ark is the throne of God and it's holding the covenant, uh, and all of that, the altar shouldn't be the focus. The sacrifice upon it is for God, but the altar isn't special. You know, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's the way I see it.
I like
But
that.
I had the same thought though. I was like, because not to spoil what's coming up, but once we get past chapter 25, the rest of it is how to build the tabernacle and the altar, and like the clothes you're supposed to
Yeah.
wear and all that stuff.
If you look at my notes for 26, like I need to do more research. My notes on her just like, okay, so this is what happens. What the hell?
Yeah,
That's it.
it goes from telling a story to being like the most specific rules for how to build a box, you know?
Most specific, but also least informative. Like,
Yeah, that's true.
if you don't already have knowledge of how these tents were made, you can't
Yeah.
recreate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. I think, and so we were talking about real quick so that's the end of chapter 20. Right, given that verse 26 brings us to the end of chapter 20, the one thing that I wanted to make mention of before we move on, we were talking about the specificity versus the vagueness. And one thing that I wanted to mention was I was talking to some people on the Judaism Reddit, and they mentioned how when it comes to, now again, these are people who don't necessarily believe in the deification of Jesus Christ, right? So, but one of them made an interesting point. They said that it wasn't until Jesus that we got a more strict interpretation of what these things meant, right? So you had to, the things were kind of vague, and the believers had to be like, hey, Jesus, what do you make of these? What do you make of all these different rules? And a lot of what Jesus was talking about was, making these rules more specific. And in it, when we talk about what, so we talked about this before in the pre-production. In Matthew 22:37, he says, a lawyer asks Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, honoring God. And he said, but an equally important commandment is loving your neighbor as you love yourself, right? And so basically he's taking those two, the vertical and the horizontal, the two tablets of commandments, and saying this as one and this as one are equally important, and here's the distillation of both, right? The one particular person in the subreddit's perspective was that if you're a Christian, the rules become a lot more strict. Thou shalt not murder do not murder, do not do this specific act. And here's all the ways that that act can be more specific. Even thinking about murder is considered on a par with murder. Don't even think about it. Be pure of mind, pure of speech, pure of action. Whereas if you're Jewish, it's talking, because you have all of these mishvot, all of these laws, it's saying, don't do this thing. Think about it. Someone can drive you to the point where you're like, I want to freaking kill you. That's cool. Just don't do it. Feel that way. Get all up in your feelings, but don't do that thing. Whereas there's a lot more pressure on Christians to be like, all right, God, Jesus was so perfect and pure, and that's the person after whom I need to model myself in order to achieve, heaven. That I can't even think about that stuff. I can't think about my neighbor. I can't think about killing this person. Things like that. And I wanted to bounce it off of you and see what you had to say before we close this episode.
Yeah. So, one, I don't entirely agree. Now, granted, I'm about to call this person uninformed, and I'm probably wrong, and I'm probably more uninformed than they are. I acknowledge that, but just from my perspective, what I've seen so far, reading up to this in my past life as a Christian, various times, there was 1,500 years supposedly for people to discuss this and everything else. The rabbinic tradition developed, and all of this. You can't say that it was just vague and then Jesus made it more specific, because there's so much time for people to interpret this and come up with their own stuff. It's why, you don't say the name of God. They're just trying to, cover their asses basically. And that's essentially what Jesus is doing as well. He's saying, at one point Jesus says, in order to get into the kingdom, you have to keep the law better than the Pharisees and Sadducees, or whatever the wording is. And so he's saying, basically doing the same thing. Don't murder. Don't even think about it. Just cover your ass. That kind of thing. That's my perspective on it.
Well, in that case, it sounds pretty accurate what this guy said, what this person said.
Yeah, but I mostly took issue with the idea that Jesus is coming and making it more specific when the Jews didn't, even though there was so much time, and they did. That's my prime.
Okay, and that's fair, and it could very well be that I'm the one that added that little bit just to kind of get from one point to the next.
It could be, but Jesus is essentially doing what the Jews did, just about other things.
Right.
Yeah.
So that essentially brings us to the end of the of what I had prepared for the Ten Commandments. Did you have anything else that you wanted to discuss? Or
no, I would like to say this is still early on in this, and again, we're doing this for us and not necessarily expecting it to get popular and have people watch and everything else. But if there are people out there listening, please comment, email us, whatever. Let us know where we're wrong. Let us know where you have differing opinions. Even if you don't necessarily think we're wrong, a different perspective is going to help us understand it better. And that's why we're doing this, is for understanding.
Even if you know us personally and you're watching, I've gotten a lot of feedback from people via text and stuff. Feel free to reach out on a public platform. That way you can kind of like let people see that there is a discussion taking place. I've gotten a few every episode that's released. I have a few more friends who are like, "Hey man, I like what you're doing," or "Hey man, that's the stupidest crap I've ever seen." So all of that's valid, and it's all necessary to help inspire me to continue to do it.
My dad reached out and he's like, "So how's it going?" And I was like, "Good." And he always calls it something different, biting the apple or tasting the apple and stuff like that. And
how's that licking the fruit thing?
Yeah. But he goes, why are you doing this? Are you trying to make money or something? I was like, no. If you watch the first episode, we explain why. And I told him the story again with the neighbor and everything. And we're just trying to understand it. And he goes, "Oh, that's good. That's good." It's like, yeah, thanks. That's great.
Are you trying to make money? I don't know if there's not money in Bible explication. So
especially from two non-believers who don't know anything.
Exactly. Yeah, two non-charismatic non-believers. That's I should add that to the intro. A podcast where two non-charismatic non-believers.
There you go.
But yeah, so if you do feel inclined to reach out, please do. The email address is podcast.eatingtheapple@gmail.com. Again, I'm pretty sure that you can leave a comment on any of the platforms. We're on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. All of it is Eating the Apple. All right. Well, I think we're going to end it here. We're going to pick up on the next episode with chapter 21. So until such time as we actually start to discuss chapter 21, my name is Jeff.
I'm Chris.
And this has been Eating the Apple.
Keep on trucking.